farts, old farts, two old farts, Steve and Dave. Sometimes you find a diamond in the rough. Not this time though. This is just rough. Two old farts. There is no better waste of time. Two guys, two old guys. A lot of BS and more drivel than you can shake a stick at. Steve and Dave. God help us.
Oh, David. That's exciting that God's going to help us. So which God would that be, David? No, we'll discuss that on another show.
Well, there are many gods.
Many gods. I know. We got to pick
gods,
one.
Many gods.
Mine, I bow 5 times to a day in Mecca, which is the New York Federal Reserve. So that is very important to me that we bow to. New York. Just so we know, David, New York City.
No, Stephen,
New York.
Stephen, we had this discussion, I think, the other day when we spoke on our end of year Christmas party. You've lost that deal, my friend.
I have.
I'm just waiting for the Lagos bank.
Yes, I'm waiting for the Nigerian Bank of New York to get a hold of you and pay you.
Yeah.
That'll be awesome. Today, David, I'm very excited. We have BCG on, or BrownCarGuy. I'm not sure why they call him that, but we'll find out. So, but I'm very excited about this.
So this is something very dear to your wallet.
It's very dear to my wallet. My wife's not happy about it, but it's dear to my wallet. So yes, she doesn't even know we're doing this show. She'll just see it and yell at me later, which is perfect. So because she's busy.
Okay.
So I like that. So are we ready to bring him in?
Yes, please, because it's going to be an exciting show. Because you know a little bit about him because you cheated today and found out something.
I watched his YouTube videos. I have.
Shahzad, and I just, as far as I can know, Stephen, he's actually a little bit more experienced about doing all this YouTube stuff than we are. So
he's a professional.
Maybe we can actually learn something.
Well, us learning is that's a whole nother show. So, and here he is, ladies and gentlemen. For the people on the podcast, you can't see him, but the YouTube viewers can. So there you go.
Hello, gentlemen.
Hello, welcome. Thank you so much for doing the show.
Yeah, hello to
morning,
David and assalamu alaikum to Stephen, because since you said you pray 5 times a day, I thought, he's almost there.
I'm almost there. And being Jewish, it's a whole nother thing
I have to deal with. Shalom.
Yeah, shalom. We got the whole thing covered. Listen, I always tell people I have real estate in both places because I'm not sure and I want to make sure.
Hedge your bets.
Hedge my bets. It's like the guy in the movie with the mummy that had like every religious symbol on his chain. I feel like that's like me. It's like I got it all. I don't know who's going to be right. With our luck, it's a little green alien 3 feet tall goes, "You were a science experiment. Leave me alone."
Science experiment gone wrong.
That's right, terribly wrong. So it's just like I don't know why you guys bother me.
I don't get involved. I don't get involved in these religious discussions because I was born Church of England, so it's guaranteed.
So you're really. Wow, you really are living in a make-believe world.
This is the beginning of a good joke, isn't it? A Muslim, a Jew, and a Christian walked into a YouTube video. What happened next?
That's right. The fans right now are either going to be cringing or they're going to be like, "This is going to be really good. We're going to watch this."
Yeah.
So, well, I want to start off and we were talking a little off air. And I just want to say this again. I have watched your videos. I love your videos. I like your person, everything about you. And I told you I put you in the category, and I'm assuming this is a compliment because I know Doug Marrero, the Smoking Tire, and then a couple other guys that I can't remember their names, or their channels, but they're out of Canada, and I find you just as engaging and just as informative of them. And I know they have, if you will, like most channels, have a little more viewers. But I'm assuming with our 12 global fans, they're just going to propel you into stardom overnight.
This is my moment. This is what I've been waiting for.
I know. Everybody that comes
Stephen,
here.
I've got to say thank you so much. It's very kind of you to say. And, absolutely, it's a privilege to be mentioned in the same breath as those guys. I've actually met those guys briefly in Dubai. Right. But, yeah, lovely guys. And Dr. Merrill, really tall. I mean, I'm tall, 6'2". He's one of the few individuals that I actually had to look up to. He's extraordinary.
And can I tell you what's really funny? When I watch Doug's videos, I look at Doug, and there's a guy named Jamie out of the UK that does videos as well for cars, and he's 6'2". I look at Doug because I know he's like 6'2", 6'3", 6'4".
No, he's 6'4" at least.
So depending on the car he sits in, and I'm like, I think I may want to look at that car. I look at his head to the roof, and I'm like, okay, I've got 2 inches lower. not going to work for me. Because I see, like, he was in a Pagani once, and I was like, oh, I love the car. It's beautiful. And then all of a sudden he sat in, and I'm like, yeah, it's not going to work. So it's like, I want to like enjoy the car. So
yeah, but that's very interesting, and we're getting into too much technical detail already. But there's something very
Oh
interesting
no,
about
no,
height.
this is
This is good. Okay, fine. Because I always say I'm 6'2" in my reviews. If you've seen my reviews, I always tell people, because when I sit in the back, I tell people, but I say 6'2"
right,
with long legs. And I think that
right,
that's fundamental,
yeah,
because there's a difference in how body shapes are formed.
yep,
yeah.
So, for example, a lot of people will get into a car and it won't work for them. And I'm
yeah,
like, but I'm taller than you. How come? That's because they're taller in the torso, for
yep,
example. So there's a lot of various aspects to look at. So
yes,
height alone is not a good barometer, but it's one of the basic things. So yeah,
great.
absolutely. But yeah,
And
sorry, I've
comfort.
jumped in there.
No,
Sorry
that's
about that.
okay. I have a friend in Monte Carlo, and he had a 458 or one, or maybe, yeah, it was a 458. And I remember I sat in it and I laughed at him. I said, dude, I have a normal Tucus. I said, this Tucus is made for a little gay Italian guy. I said, or a woman. I cannot sit in this seat. It's like half my butt cheek is on, like, the bump. And I'm like, this is not working for me. And he thought it was the funniest thing in the world, because he's just this little English guy, like a Mr. Bean size, and he's like, oh no, it's great. It fits fine. I'm like, who can sit in this car? So, so I look at the big guys and I'm
Yeah.
like, if they're comfortable, then I'm like, okay, now this car can go on the list to go look at, because I hate to put a car on the list, get excited, and you sit in it and you're like, oh, okay.
It can
Yep.
absolutely ruin a car, and that's why I always
Yep.
say to people, even my reviews, I say, look, you're listening to my review and you'll make a judgment based on what I've told you, but it's not sufficient. You
Right.
need to put yourself in that car, and if
Yep.
possible, take it for a drive. Because even just sitting in the car is not enough to tell you something. It's
Correct.
because you sit in the car, you focus on it, and you think, oh, this is all right. If you like the car, you're predisposed to it, and you sit in it, and you're like, oh, this is okay, this will be fine. But
Right.
when you're driving it, you realize, oh no. So I'll give you an example. The Fiat 500 Abarth, right, for
Right.
example, right, cute little car,
Very
looks
nice, very
incredible.
nice.
It's a very nice car, and the performance is fantastic for a car of that size. The handling is absolutely brilliant, but what they've done is they put racing bucket seats in there, and
Right.
those seats are very tight and they're very, very hard. So I'm of a reasonable behind, let's say, not an overly generous behind, but even I, after like 10-20 minutes in the car, I was like, this is actually uncomfortable now. And I think that's why it's so important to just take the car for a drive and feel what it's like, and drive it down some of your favorite roads if you can. Do scenarios that you're comfortable with, because once you do that, then you know if the car really works for you. But stuff like comfort is more important than people realize. I think it's a crucial part of it.
Well, and I think
Yeah.
what happens is, and during COVID especially, I had friends that be like, I'm buying this car. And I was like, first of all, how much are you spending? And they would tell me, and I'm like, have you sat in this? And they're like, no. I go, have you driven it? They're like, no, it's COVID. You can't. I'm like, they're going to deliver the car. Like, you're going to pay the 12 or 1500 or whatever to get it delivered. And you're going to literally test drive it. Then they're like, yes. I go, and if you don't like it, they say, well, the dealer said they'll take it back. I'm like, good luck with that. And I was like, I mean, I've been fortunate enough to do the supercar stuff, and it's very nice. But there are certain supercars, and I don't care if you're 3'2" or 7'5", they're just not comfortable. Full stop,
No.
doesn't matter. And
Yeah.
they really, and I said this to a friend of mine, and he has tons of them, and he and I think, are on the same mind. It's like a work of art. He actually buys them, puts them in the garage, starts them up like once a week. They drive them around the block, they park them, they wash them, they're done. And for him, it's sort of like, his thing is like, they'll appreciate, I will sell them, I will buy something else. He's like, it's like
Yeah.
art. Instead of hanging it on the
Speculator.
wall, I
Yeah.
have a garage.
Yeah.
But some of
Yeah.
these guys, I think they bought them because it was like, ooh, cool.
Yeah.
And now the mystique is almost gone, like with the Lamborghinis and the Ferraris,
Oh.
where they used to produce a handful. Now they're like, and nothing against Mercedes or BMW, but they're Mercedes and BMW. It's like, how many can we pump out? And it's sort of
Yeah.
like the mystique of owning a supercar, unless you're going into like a Pagani or a Koenigsegg or a Bugatti, is gone. It's like, I see, I used to live in Palm Beach. So, and I used to live in LA. So seeing these cars in Palm Beach and LA is like every other car is a supercar, is a Ferrari. It's like, big Bentley, Rolls Royce, yeah, whatever. So seeing now a Bugatti or something, or a Pagani, okay, now I'm excited, or or a Koenigsegg. But then I called Koenigsegg once and I said, can I daily drive your new car, the 4-seater? And the guy's chuckling, and I'm like, that's not the answer that I was hoping to get. And I'm like, and then the one I called a dealer in Chicago. He goes, "What are you going to do with the Conan stack?" And I said, "I want a daily drive." He goes, "Nope, nope, nope, can't sell it to you." I'm like, "Seriously?" He goes, "Dude, this car's made to take it from your garage to Cars and Coffee,
Yeah.
maybe a road rally with a mechanic, and that's it." He says, "If you're going to daily drive this," he says, "you're going to be very unhappy." I'm like, "Wow." So, and I think people have to understand that they really are art. I mean, they're beautiful. But if you want like a car you want to beat up, go buy a Mercedes or the BMW Alpha Pine 8 Series. You know what I mean? Like those you can drive. But these other cars, you drive a Lamborghini every day or a Ferrari every day. They're very nice, but you and your mechanic are going to be on a first name basis. My opinion, from what I see. So I don't know. You're the professional. You tell me.
You're absolutely right. And I'm
just before we get into all the cars, bits and pieces, I'm going to be politically incorrect. And you call yourself the brown car guy. I mean,
why is this? We don't understand. Do you have a bad tan? What's the problem here?
No, it's more of a thing like because perhaps our listeners and the viewers have already seen you. If they're not, they're going to see it anyway because we're going to put all the links and everything underneath. But how did you become the brown car guy?
The brown is not related to a car. So let's get that out of the way first, because that's the first question everybody asks.
I thought you just loved Austin Allegros or
brown cars, exactly.
That's right.
Yeah, especially 70s cars, which actually, by the way, look great in brown. So, for example, I have a BMW E30, which is kind of my hero car for the channel. And I often take that to shows and events and stuff like that. And I parked it at an event one time, walked away. I was walking back to it, and a couple of guys were looking at it. And I've got my URL in the windows, right? And as I walked up, I could start to hear them, and I could hear their conversation. One of them turned to the other one and says, "But it's not brown, it's black." So I walked into the middle of that and I said, "No, it's not the car that's brown, it's the guy that's brown," And I'm very clear about that. And I don't think that, it's a lot of people say, "Is it racist?" And I said, "No, it's not racist." And I can guarantee 100% reassure you that it's not racist, because I think that I've lived through probably which was the golden age of racism, which was 70s in London.
The 1970s in UK,
The 1970s in London. We're talking National Front. We're talking Enoch Powell, Rivers of Blood speech, all of that. And I grew up at a time when not a single day would go by without getting some kind of verbal or physical or visual racist abuse. So very often, like today, when people talk about, "Oh, that's racist," I'm like, "Bitch, please."
I love it. That's great.
Seriously, that doesn't even register a 1 on my barometer.
Right.
So it's that kind of thing. So to me, brown, in the way that black is a definer. It's an identity. And why did I go down that route? Well, when I came back to UK, I spent 13 years in Dubai, where I had a very successful career also as a motoring journalist. I did pretty much everything there. When I came back at the beginning of 2019, I suppose I expected to walk into a job similar to what I was doing there. I was editorial director level, and I really, really, really struggled, And I do find that the UK media, and in particularly the niche media, such as the automotive media, is still very cliquey. And it's still very closed, and it's it's who you are and who you know and which school you've been to and all of this sort of stuff. So to me, I kind of got very frustrated about that, and I started doing freelance, and I thought, okay, I'll create my own brand, and I'll show these guys, I'll do my own thing, So I thought, what should I call it? And I thought, I'm going to double down on my identity. If people have an issue with who I am, or what color I am, or what my name is, or what religion I am, or where I'm from, or anything like that, I'm going to go, you know what? This is my identity. This is who I am, and I'm proud of it. But that doesn't diminish me in any way whatsoever as a journalist and a content creator. And so I thought I'm going to double down on that, really stress on it, and actually not only that, but put a flag in the ground for diversity in automotive, for example. Automotive being a field that I'm particularly involved in, obviously in terms of media and elsewise. But to me, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to talk about that. And if you've got time, there's another thing I'd like to sort of go into. Sure. When I first got into the field here in the UK, I remember going to my first international car launch. And I can remember specifically it was a Ford Focus that was being launched in France. And I was very excited because I was on my first international launch, and I was still relatively green. And I went there and I could recognize a lot of the faces because there were journalists that I admired and respected. I read in magazines and stuff like that. But it was very cliquey, and I kind of felt a little bit isolated, and I didn't necessarily feel like I was being welcomed or embraced into that group. I saw a black guy in that meeting room, and he turned out to be the UK's first black journalist, Kevin Haggerty, and I made a beeline for him, brother, And since then, we've been friends. So we used to go to events at that time, and we often used to joke that we're the only black and brown faces, in that room or in that invitation, in that press event. So fast forward to a couple of years ago, when I came back here, and I again went to some events with him, and I turned around to him one day and I said, look, it's been something like 17, 18 years or whatever. We're still the only black and brown faces in the room. What's going on? I feel that there's been no progression. Although I know that there are a handful of Asian and people from other minority communities that are in the field, but they're not high profile. They're not really getting out there. And I think that, being somebody who's done this for a very long time and who's got a bit of experience, I thought, you know what, I'm also going to stick up the identity flag and go, this is who I am, this is what I do, and here I am, and I'm doing it.
Very cool. No, I mean, listen, I'm from New York City, as nobody really knows, so they don't even talk about it. Inside joke. So at the end of the day, you don't see color anymore. Everyone's a human being. But I think on the diversity thing, I think that's awesome. I know in the US, there's a few channels where we got like some Asians and we have some black guys that are doing car reviews. But you're right. It's mostly just a bunch of white guys. And then we have a few chicks. I guess you can't say chicks anymore. Yeah, we can. Who cares? Yeah. So there's a few chicks that do it that are relatively famous. And I watch them. Like, I guess Supercar Blondie comes to mind. But Supercar Blondie to me has become I don't know. It's more of it doesn't even like a car review. It's just like it's more of a model in a car.
And she is, because she's a model and she's a newsreader. In fact, she was on the news. She was the newsreader on Dubai Eye, which is the same radio station that I did 6 years as a guest on a weekly show. So I didn't know her directly, but I knew people that know her. So one of my friends is a lady called Alex Kappa Murdoch, for example, and she's a proper car girl. So she was in the UAE. She did radio. She did a bit of TV with me as well, and she was actually a race instructor at the Dubai Autodrome, so she would instruct people how to drive. So whenever people in the Middle East, it was hilarious because you've got a lot of Arabs with testosterone and they're like, well, you know how to drive, and I'm like, this lady here, she's going to run rings around you, you're going to be so embarrassed, but she's done stunt driving for movies and all that sort of stuff. And I said to her, if that was Supercar Blondie, she's not blonde, but if that was Supercar Brunette, for example, then I total respect to her because I know her and I know that she's a total car person. She's also in what they call the, when you're in the army, but you're not, the word escapes me at the moment.
Reserve.
So she's in the reserves as well. And so she can kick your ass as well. So she can do that as well. She
I love it. That's great.
So if it was somebody like her, I'd be like, respect. She knows exactly what she's talking about. Supercar Blondie, she is not a car person. She never was. But her husband apparently is. So he's basically the guy that basically guided her into doing that. What she's very good at is media. And she's done brilliantly. And all respect to her because the progression that she's made from, just being a radio presenter on the news in Dubai Eye to being a global automotive superstar is extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary. And I wish I could emulate like a tenth of that. Would be incredible. But all respect to her. But she comes from that background.
And it's funny because you can watch certain people and you'll watch them like I listen to you when you talk about a car. I'm like, oh, here's a car guy. Like he gets it. It's like kind of watching like Jay Leno's Garage here on CNBC. It's like Jay's like, so they use a lug nut that's a 3/16 of a size. I'm like, holy Jay, like calm down. I don't need to know that, right?
I love Jay Leno. By the way, all best wishes to Jay Leno. I hope he's recovering well.
Yes, from the burns. Yes, been there, done that. So I hopefully he'll be okay. But so he's a car guy. You're a car guy. Like I said, the other people we mentioned, they're car guys. Like they really like their cars. And then you get some where you just watch it and you're just sort of like, okay, so someone wrote a script for you and you literally have no idea what you're talking about. And when they're driving the car, it's like, I'm a big cigar guy. And somebody will do a cigar review and you'll watch them smoke the cigar. I'm like, so this is your first cigar. It's the same thing. It's like, this is your first car you're actually driving. There's not that comfort when they're doing it. So when you started this,
I need to connect you with another friend of mine who is a big cigar guy. You should probably have him on the show. And he gets into there's a video of my BMW, and he gets into the car and he starts smoking. And I don't smoke. And I'm like, dude, And he's like, yeah, but it's a very expensive cigar. I'm like, that doesn't make a difference.
So this is just so we're clear.
I've just raised the value of your car. I'm like, I don't think so.
That is what I told my wife, and she tells me apparently no. And I'm like, listen, I don't know if you understand how these cigars work. And she keeps telling me I don't understand how the marriage works. So I'm like, it's just sorry, I don't get it. So
dangerous ground.
And no, she's joking. Then she'll say to me, just remember, happy wife, happy life. And I'm like, that's happy right. Life. I forgot. So I'm relegated to now smoking cigars outside or with the boys or at a cigar club.
If I want to be a car reviewer, do I?
You have to know cars.
Well, I do. Let's say for that, miracles do happen, and I do know something about cars. So what happens then? Do I go to my local car dealer, or do I call up the local or the the national distributor for a particular brand and say, "Hi, I'm David Oldfart, and you need to give me a car, and I'm going to tell the whole world about it." Is that how it works? Or
I wish it was as simple as that. I really do, but unfortunately, it's not. It's very, very difficult because, as you can imagine, I get a lot of youngsters messaging me now, approaching me, talking to me, and they're like, "Oh,
and old people that we're seeing,
and old farts as well, like us." I mean, I'm pretty much in the club, But it's been, I've been doing this for 33 years, and I started out as a frontiers land, if you like. I was Saudi Arabia's first motoring journalist, and I talked myself into doing a column for Saudi Gazette, a newspaper there, and there was no manufacturer PR. There were only dealers, and I would go to a dealer and I'd say, I want to drive a car, write an article, and they were like, why you do this? I said, because I'm going to write an article. They said, but how much I pay for this? I'm like, no, you don't pay for it. I'm just going to do it. And the newspaper going to pay me. And they say, oh, newspaper pay you for advert, you do for me? It doesn't make sense. It's like, I'm going to withdraw my advertising. I'm like, no, don't do that. so it was a long, hard slog. I really had to start from scratch. And so that kind of, armed me with being able to cope with the difficulties. But it's fun. There's two fundamentals. First of all, just deciding you want to be a car reviewer is not enough. I mean, as Steve was saying, I think that not just the basic knowledge of cars, I think more than that is an affinity, a passion, an emotional connection. I think it's kind of important because otherwise cars are different to other products. I mean, you could say, okay, I want to be a fridge reviewer or a cooker or a heater or whatever. It's just a product. There are certain, metrics that you measure and you call this is a good thing, this is a bad thing, right? But cars have always been much more than that. As you alluded to earlier, they're art. They're moving art. There's a passion involved. There's engineering involved. There's little foibles. There's little characteristics. There's little personality traits that cars have. There's brand image, so there's so much that you have to encompass. If you want to start out as a motoring journalist, and that's fundamental. Secondly, I think the knowledge, of course, is also part of that. But secondly, I think is the ability to communicate. And I think that's where a lot of people go amiss. And I think a lot of youngsters will come to me and they say, I want to be a car journalist. I say, why do you want to become a car journalist? I want to drive lots of cool cars. I'm like, then don't become a car journalist. Go and become, a forex trader. Go on to the stock market, or go and become an accountant, or go become an executive director, go become a doctor. Go and become something that will get you lots of money, in which then you can afford to indulge your passions. Because if that's all that's about, then do that. If you want to be a car journalist, key to what you're doing is the ability to communicate. And I think that's fundamental in any media outlet, but I think it's, that's equally applies to this, is that if you're not able to take your passions and your knowledge and your assessment and your analysis of a product and then effectively communicate it in a way that's relatable and understandable, then you're on a hiding to nothing. There's no point to that. Once you've done... Yeah, go on. Sorry.
No, I think the key to that is there has to be passion.
Yeah.
I think that's, if you don't have passion, whether it's cars, cigars, art, whatever, or even movie reviews, right? You can read it when someone's like, I got stuck with this.
Yeah.
I don't care.
Yeah.
But it's like, and even now, especially if they do a YouTube channel, right? You have to have a passion about, even if the car's crap, you're still excited that you get to try it. And I think that a lot of them don't have that, I think. I don't know.
Yeah. Sorry, Dave, you were going to say something.
So what happens if you have to almost do a car apprenticeship, so they give you all the sort of vanilla cars to start off to review, and then you work your way up to something a little bit more expensive?
I suppose that, yeah, I
Is that
suppose if
how
you
it
join a
works? Or
magazine, yeah, I suppose
Right.
if you joined a magazine or an existing outlet, then that's probably how you would progress. I started independently and I progressed independently, but I think in every case you would work your way up. But again, what's happening now is that, as you were alluding to earlier, with the people that are purchasing supercars, the people that are also moving into this media sphere, if you like, are jumping the gun. So if I go back to my own career, I mean, I basically did forms of journalism for about 15 years until I then pronounced to myself that I was ready, I think, to be an editor. And I was
Right.
like, I think I'm now good enough that I could be an editor. These days, you have people that are coming out of uni or basically starting, and they want to be an editor by next year. You know what I mean? So this is you know what I mean? So the level of
Right, right.
progression has changed completely. So the expectations have changed completely. So people like, oh, I want to do a supercar tomorrow. I want to go straight into supercars. I'm like, what? You don't know the fundamentals of driving. You don't know the
Right.
fundamentals of handling. You haven't learned to walk yet, but you want to run. How can you assess this machine when you don't know how to assess this machine? So I think that that's all part of it. But I think that passion is very important, and knowledge and an understanding, but the ability to communicate, I think it's key. If you can't do that, then go and do something else. If it's just the passion that you're into, it's just the cars that you're into, go and do something else that will afford you the ability to enjoy that. But if it's journalism that you want to do, then you have to be a journalist. The other thing I want to say about journalism is that I consider myself a trained journalist because I've been up through that, and I've done other forms of journalism as well. But with cars, and this basically also confirms what you were saying, Steve, is that with cars, because there's a passion, there's an emotion involved. What I have a problem with, my contemporaries, if you like, other old farts in our field, is that they take themselves very seriously. And I'm
Yep.
like, guys, this is not life and death journalism. We're not doing political journalism. We're not covering wars. We're talking about cars. And why did we start talking about cars? Because we love them. Why have you forgotten that you actually enjoy this process? And I hope and I think and I try to bring that out in my content, that I actually enjoy what I'm doing. I actually still am in love with cars.
Right. Which is, I think, like I said, it goes through, without that passion, you have absolutely nothing, right? And that has to come through, because if not, after a while, people are like, all right, it's just another YouTuber that's reviewing cars. But over in the States, and I don't know if it's this way in the UK, from what I understand, if I want to be a car reviewer, right, or an influencer now, I guess over here, a lot of the car companies now have their own PR in-house, and you have to be on the list. So if you want the latest Mercedes or BMW or Ford or whatever, like they say, hey, we can drop you off a Ford or a Mercedes, whatever the car is, a Lamborghini tomorrow at your house. You can have it for 3 days and test it. Is that how it's in the UK, or do you still have to knock on doors and make phone calls to see if people will give you a car to drive or whatnot?
No, that's exactly how it is. Yeah. So there is
Okay.
there is there is basically a media industry, a PR industry that services either the dealerships or the car manufacturers themselves directly. So yeah, you have to basically get onto their radar, and
Okay.
then of course they then put you into categories. So for example, I'm being completely honest with you guys now. When I was in Dubai, I was an A-list journalist. So I was like
Right.
one of the top guys there. So pretty much I could have anything anytime I wanted, call up Ferrari, drove Bugattis, I drove everything.
Right.
So over here, when I started from scratch, I'm like, okay, so I'm starting again. So now I've got to build up again. So it's a case of, let's see who will lend me cars or who will invite me to events, or what I can get a hold of. So and they will assess you based on whatever they like. It may be what they're trying to do at that point in time in terms of how they're reaching out to people. For example, some people still prefer, and when I'm talking people, I mean manufacturers and PRs. Some
Right.
will still prefer to go down the old route of print media, which, let's be honest, is dead. But
Right.
people prefer that. Some will prioritize TV or radio journalism. Some will prioritize high-profile influencers. But by that, what I mean is they'll look at the numbers. So they look at the
Right.
viewing numbers and subscription numbers. So again, it's really difficult if you're starting out. Then you're not able to show or demonstrate, that level of audience, and it's kind of difficult. So it's a chicken and egg situation. You don't get the product, you can't get the viewing. You haven't got the viewing, they won't give you the product.
Right. Well, I know one of the gentlemen we mentioned earlier in the beginning when he started, he used to say, like, if you have a really cool car you want me to review, email me. Or he said he would go, like, I guess he got friendly with local dealerships and they would let him try whatever the latest and greatest toy is. So you brought up Bugatti. So here's my question. What do you think of it? Do you think it's really worth the $3 million? Whether you want to look at it as art or a car, worth $3 million, or is it just sort of like you have too much money and you just don't know what to do with your time?
Basically, yeah.
That's
Well,
what I
that's true.
think.
That's true for most supercar owners, isn't it?
That's true.
The Bugatti, and we'll talk about the Veyron because that's the one that I drove. The newer one was the successor was the Chiron. The reason I want to separate those two is because I think the Chiron was a little bit more beautiful. I think they took more time over the design and the interior and the rest of it. The original car, my relationship with the original car was that I was very intellectually impressed with it.
Okay.
If you see what I'm getting to. Yeah. So it wasn't a car that emotionally drew me in, because in itself, it was an engineering exercise. I mean, the whole concept of that car was because Volkswagen wanted to set a precedent. They wanted to put, the flag on the ground. They wanted to set a new benchmark for supercars. They wanted to say, this is what we can do. We can, create 1,000 horsepower. We can reach this speed limit. We can do this. We can create a car that not only can do that, but can do it every day. Could do it regularly, can do it reliably, and you could drive it to the shops. Nobody does, but if you wanted to, you could drive it to the shops. So that was, and of course they made a huge loss. You talk about $2 million, $3 million that you're spending on the car, but every car was sold at a loss. Because of the amount that was invested in that engineer. It was literally like when Kennedy said we're going to send a man to the moon. Not because it makes sense, but because it's there, and it was that sort of thing. So Bugatti was like, we're going to do this, not because it makes any kind of sense, but we're going to do it, And in doing so, they then obviously set in sequence an opening of doors for a lot of other boutique manufacturers and small manufacturers, indeed other rival manufacturers, to then create their supercars as well and sort of overpopulate and oversaturate that whole arena. That's kind of Bugatti's fault to an extent. To drive the car, I remember driving the Veyron and it going stupendously quick in the car. I mean, too quick to even look down at the speedometer because I was too afraid. Because when you're going those speeds, I mean, the vanishing point is not there anymore. It's right here in your nose. It's everything is sort of warping at you. But the feeling that I had with driving it was that it was too easy. I mean, any of us old farts could jump into that car and drive that car, because it's easy. Or we could take it to the shops or whether take it to work, whatever. It just felt very easy. And I remember driving other supercars. I remember you mentioned Koenigsegg earlier, and I remember driving the first one, the CCX. In Dubai, and you did need a chaperone because first of all it was very idiosyncratic in the way that they've laid it out and the controls. So somebody needed to be there to actually tell you how.
And the way you started.
The way you started it, right?
The way you started it, you needed a book. It's like it's not a key; it's a key. But you stick a key here. You have to push this button. You flip a switch. You do something with a key. You have to raise your arm, kick another thing, slap the passenger, and then the car starts. And I'm like,
that's right.
Really? It's going to take 3 hours to start a car. That's crazy.
But great anti-theft.
No one can steal it.
Nobody can steal it. But once you got it started and once you got underway, oh my God, that experience was so visceral. It was so raw. It was so like no matter how quick you were going, you felt like you were going quick. You felt like you were doing something that you should be locked away for the rest of your life for. You know what I mean?
Right.
It was like that. And to me, that basically personifies the difference between the Bugatti and something like the Koenigsegg. And touching back on what you were saying earlier about supercars, I think supercars today also fall into two categories. There are the Koenigsegg's and the Paganis and stuff like that, and the not the McLarens.
No, they're not supercar anymore.
No, they're normal now. But Gordon Murray. So Gordon Murray's car.
Murray.
Yes. So this sort of stuff, which is on a different level. And you still need to be somebody with skill and ability and maybe perhaps a death wish to drive those cars. You know what I mean? And they're not going to be the most comfortable things. And then on the other side, you have literally got the Lamborghinis and Ferraris of the world that you could go to work in, you could pick your kids up in. I mean, I picked up my kids once in Dubai from school in a Ferrari. Which one was it? Not the Scaglietti, the other one. Anyway, it was a Lusso. So
one of the 430s.
Yeah. Okay. No, it was a 4-seater.
Oh no, I know the one you're talking about.
Yeah,
the Lusso or something.
Not an F12. I can't remember anyway. So it was one of the 4-seaters, right? So I picked them up from school, and I became, of course, daddy of the year because I picked up my kids in the Ferrari. But you could do that,
Right.
So we have two types of supercars, and again, we are old farts here. So we're talking about when I was growing up. A supercar to me was like something that you would never see. Basically, you never saw it. Unless you went to a motor show or something, you'd never actually see one on the road. And if you did, you'd just pee in your pants. You know what I mean? You'd just lose it completely, And when you saw the car, you'd be like, it wasn't just the car. It'd be like, whoever is driving that car he must be a superstar. He must be a movie actor. He must be an astronaut. He must be somebody at the highest echelons of sporting endeavor of some kind. He must be, or he or she must be somebody very, very special. But nowadays, you've got YouTubers, 16-year-olds driving around in Lamborghini Aventadors. Do you know what I mean? It's not the same thing anymore. Yeah.
And to your point, there was a 60-minute story done with Malcolm Forbes, and he had a Countach. And I forget the reporter that went out with him. And Malcolm, he was older than us when he had it. But I remember that they parked it on Park Avenue and just stood, and everybody just touched it and like, who owns it? Who owns it? But to your point, today, like we'll go to the mall, and there's like 6 Lamborghinis, there's like 4 Ferraris, and I'm like I said, okay, big deal. And what's really interesting, I know like Aston Martin has tons of issues, but like they did the Super Leggera, and I'm like, that's almost a supercar, but your build quality sucks. Like I've gotten one, I'm
not the
it's
Super
beautiful.
Leggera. You mean like the 177 or something? Was it? I think
no, the one they just came, just the Super Leggera, like the DB whatever, the brand new one.
Okay, all right. Oh yeah, the DBS, right?
Yeah, and it's very nice, but I was like, when you go inside, everything's plastic. And I'm like, for $300,000,
can I say this now? I think it would probably say it's been a few years now. I think it was a DB9. I think it was a DB9 that I took out, or I can't remember. Anyway, I borrowed one in Dubai one time,
right?
And I was at the petrol station, and I was trying to fill it up, and I couldn't get into the damn thing to fill the thing up, And I'm there. This is embarrassing, man. I'm there for 20 minutes with an Aston Martin, So eventually I gave up and gave in, and because first the man ego kicks in, doesn't it? It's like, I don't need anybody's help. I'm a car guy. I know how to do this. I'm like, no, I can't. I don't know how to do this. So I called up the guy, and I was like, I can't get into the thing to fill it with petrol. And he's like, oh yeah, we've got a little problem on that one. Yeah, it's not quite working. Yeah, if you've got a credit card, you just need to stick something into the flap to release it.
Oh,
I'm
my
like, what?
God.
We're talking, an 800,000 dirham Aston Martin, and I'm having to jury rig the thing open to fill it with fuel. That's crazy.
Yeah, but the burning question is, of course, did you put that in a review?
At the time, I didn't know. No,
that would have been awesome in a review. No. The other thing, which is
to be honest, I have actually written. I call it the most
credit
honest
cards welcome. Huh?
Well, I have written what I call the most honest Aston Martin review ever, which is the Aston Martin Vanquish in Dubai. I did that one time.
Was that the last time you ever had?
I was going to say it was a long time after that I got to review Astons again. But
that's funny.
But it was a thing of beauty. I mean, the car is beautiful, like you say. It's just something gorgeous to behold. But and you don't want to daily drive it.
No, and that's the problem. Most of these cars you don't daily drive. Like, and the other thing, like I have a friend who has a McLaren, and it's a Spider, and it's gorgeous, and very nice. And it's the issue with the McLaren is that the front windshield usually cracks, and it doesn't matter. It just can crack because it's sunny outside. Nothing has to touch it. It just cracks. Yeah. And then I remember we got in the car, and it has the self-closing, like you just pray and the door closes, and then what would happen is the door would close. Not quite close, like a Pagani. You hold it. Sometimes it closes, sometimes it does. So he would push the button, we'd close the door, and he's like, I can't go anywhere. The door's not closed. I'm like, you could drive with the door open. He goes, we're going on the highway. I go, I didn't buy a McLaren whose door doesn't close. What do you want me to tell you? So they have these supercars, and I think that they're, instead of really making them, and I mean this in the nicest sense, a supercar, they're mass producing them, and then when they have problems, they're like, oh, like Ferrari this year had a recall, like every car, I think it was from like 2010 until yesterday, because it was a problem. And I'm thinking, your Ferrari, back in the day when Enzo was alive, all of you would have been shot. Yeah. Old school, like you're all fired, you're shot. I'm going to bring in some other people. But
quite
literally. Back in the day, literally, no joke, done. Yeah. But I mean, Ferrari, we had friends with Ferraris and the 260s and the 50s, the Dinos. Gorgeous, built forever. Like I have friends that still have built forever. The older Aston Martins, even though they're ones in the 60s, 70s, built forever. Now they're just like, we got to get it out. We got to get it out. I'm more like, you take your time.
Stephen, what else are all those crypto millionaires going to be driving, man?
Apparently right now, scooters.
Yeah. I mean, you're right. We do have an era where we're sort of beta testing cars in public, aren't we? With owners, that's what we're doing. We're like, just send them out, and we'll figure the problems out later. And you mentioned McLarens. If I can tell you, the first time I ever drove a McLaren, and it was the MP4-12C
Oh, I remember.
WTS.
Okay.
You know, it just goes on. It's like the longest name in automotive history. I think they
Right.
shortened it later. They wised up, but anyway, that's what it was. And I remember the first time I took it out out of Dubai, and I went down this road that I know, and I got up to some serious speed, not crazy speed, but serious speed. You know, I knew the road, and I had a massive bang at the front of the screen, and I'm like, oh
Right.
shit! I was like, I must have hit something, or something's flown out, or
Right.
you know, I didn't see a camel, but maybe something else was there. You know, like, what's going on? You know. Pulled over immediately, and there was a support car with me as well with the photographer, and they pulled over, and I jumped out of the car, and I'm like, I'm expecting the front of the car to be caved in because that's how loud the bang was. I was like,
Wow.
oh, this thing is written off for sure. And I looked out of the car, and the guy came up to me, and he just sees me just standing there scratching my head. And he said, "What's the matter? Why did you pull over?" I'm like, "Something happened, but I don't know what. Like, there's no damage on this car. I can't see anything wrong." And I'm looking and looking, and eventually I saw the rubber strip around the windscreen had basically come out. And what happened when it came out, it just went slap. And that's what it was doing. So basically it came out and it went slap. And to me, it sounded like, because it was a carbon, a body, carbon top that you're sitting it, right? Yeah. It basically, the sound amplified, and it sounded like basically the front of the car had ripped off. Now that thing wouldn't go back in again. So basically I had the car for several days. I was driving it around with my hand outside the window. And remember, this is the Middle East I'm talking about, where you never open the windows because the AC is always on. I had my hand outside holding the thing down the whole time. You know, I got sunburned, and it's hard for me to get sunburned, let's be honest. But I got sunburned on my hand. I mean, let's be honest. You know,
Love it.
I took it back to the guys at the dealership, and I said, "This is what happened," you know. And he was like, "Oh yeah, we know about that." I'm like, "What do you mean?" And I'm like, "By the way," and he was like, "Oh yeah, and by the way, the rubber around the door is also coming out." I was like, "Oh great, what's this about?"
God.
But the reality is, I mean, we say that, but to be fair, even when supercars were first coming out, there was a lot of trial and error, and a lot of things were sent out, without being finished and and those were the very early days of engineering. And of course, they didn't necessarily have the computer simulations and all these things that we now currently have, or even the amount of testing that now currently goes into developing any car, not just supercars. So a lot more of that is happening. So funny thing to say is that although what you're saying is absolutely right, what I'm saying is also absolutely right, but supercars and cars in general are more reliable today than they ever were, just because of what we've learned. So they are better. But with some earlier supercars, and McLaren with the MP4, again, that was their first attempt at their own supercar, road car, that is. It was them just putting it out there and seeing what they're doing, and all the learning that they've had from that, they've then put into the car. So a lot of this development, research, development, engineering is ongoing. It happens. They have to test cars in various places. For example, when I was in the Middle East, they used to come to us and we said, "Have you tested the car at a car launch?" They'd be like, "Oh, it's a new car we're bringing to your market." I'm like, "Great. Have you tested it in the Middle East?" "Oh, no, but we've tested it in Death Valley. We've tested it in this place. We've tested it." And I'm like, "No. Yes, Death Valley is hot, but it's not the Middle East. It's different here." And after a while, some of them started to figure that out. And in fact, a lot of manufacturers now have research development offices in the Middle East. In fact, most of them will not put a car out until they've tested it there. And it's to do with not only the heat, but also the ambient temperature, the humidity, but also the sand. The consistency of the sand is very different to there as it is elsewhere. For example, the abrasiveness is very different. The fact the sand will get into any kind of seal that you've created, the sand there will always get in. So there's a lot of new developments and technology that they've had to do, a lot of materials that they've had to come up with. I remember Lotus, for example, when they officially started bringing the Elise in to Dubai, they changed some of the panels. And I said, "Why have you changed these panels?" And they said, "Well, we had to put carbon fiber in because in the UK we sell it with plastic, and we found that the plastic was warping. So we've had to change that and put that in." So yeah, there's a lot that goes on, and the good manufacturers will spend time to do that research and not just put cars out and hope for the best.
Well, I'm hoping to go back to McLaren.
I was going to say McLaren. If I bought a McLaren, do I get a free roll of duct tape to go with it?
You have to, yes.
So I can seal off the windows. Is that what you're saying?
Basically, I think you'd probably be a good idea.
I'm so hoping though McLaren, because McLaren really McLaren is basically, if you will, for comfort, the Rolls Royce of supercars. It's very comfortable.
The ride is fantastic.
You could literally take a Rolls Royce on a road trip, whether it's the 720 or their new GT. You could take a McLaren.
No,
3,000 or 4,000
miles. I
miles.
have to say, because was it last year, early this year? I can't remember. I think it was a 620R I drove.
Right.
No, it was last year actually. I drove a 620R. I drove a 720S. The ride was fantastic. But I drove a 620R, which is pretty much a race-bred car on the road. They gave me a 1-hour driving route. After about 20 minutes, I was like, can I get a shortcut back? Because my back is hurting. I've got a headache now, and I just want to get out of this thing. So no, it depends. It's down to how they set the cars up. It's as simple as that. Engineering has reached such a level where you're like, what do you want the car to feel like? Okay, well, that's how we can tune it,
Yeah. But I'm hoping for McLaren's sake, they actually get their act together and actually produce a car, because they say you can daily drive it, which you can't because it'll break. But I'm hoping like all these supercars, whether even a Koenigsegg or a Pagani, make it so you really can, because it's a shame for these beautiful pieces of art just to sit in a garage.
But having said that, Steve, and actually this is a question for Dave. Do you really care when it comes to supercars? Do you really care? Is it important for you to see them on the roads?
Yeah, I like beautiful cars. Yeah.
Like
but define beautiful cars. Again, are we talking supercar? Or are we talking beautiful cars?
Well,
so my point being,
I don't live in an area in Holland which has the same amount of supercars as maybe Steve has. Living in Austin. You don't see a lot of them in Holland. It's also considered to be slightly distasteful.
Interesting.
And the first thing that people say is drug dealer, as soon as they see one. So
yeah, I get that a lot. Anyway, I remember when I was younger.
They're beautiful. I mean, I used to live next on the same street as the one and only Maserati dealer in the west of Holland. So everybody used to bring all their cars to this Maserati dealer. And, on a sunny afternoon, we sit outside with the kids and just listen to the noise as they, as they bringing them back to the garage after they've been serviced and everything. And I fell in love with Maseratis just through that.
Yeah.
So,
That's how.
So, Stephen,
absolutely.
Next birthday, make Maserati for me.
There you go. Now you know what to get him. But we're talking about the drug dealer thing. But talking about the drug dealer thing, when I first started doing this, I was living in Wembley, right, in London, right, and which actually just
you're not going to tell us about your drug dealing as well, then?
Well, this is it. You see, because I used to have different cars and stuff, right? One time I was chatting to a neighbor, and we were talking about the latest car I had in the drive, and I told him I was a journalist, and he was like, "Oh, that's such a relief." I'm like, "What do you mean it's such a relief?" He said, "I thought you were a drug dealer." so nowadays, when people ask me, I just tell them, "Yeah, I'm a car thief."
Nice. I like that.
Yeah.
See how far I get with that. But again, going back to the whole concept about beautiful cars and supercars and whether you need them. And again, it's interesting what you say about Holland and what you're saying about America, and particularly in the context of New York, and for me, the context of London and Dubai. Right. For example, in Dubai, I was sitting on Jumeirah Beach Road having a meeting in a cafe one time, and 6 Bugatti Veyrons drove past in the hour that we were sitting there. So at that point, their relevance completely disappears. They're like, what? Who cares? So then it's all about context, and it's all about whether the car, the beautiful car that provides joy or provides interest or provides color and fascination to our roadscape, for example, has to be a supercar. I argue that it doesn't necessarily have to be. So, for example, going back to the Dubai experience, drive a Bugatti Veyron, drive a Lamborghini Aventador, drive a Ferrari F12, whatever, and people are like, whatever, but drive a Morgan three-wheeler, or drive as my partner, my business partner there, he had the only DeLorean that was registered on the roads. Drive one of those, and suddenly you're a superstar. Suddenly, everybody would go crazy. Cameras would come, iPhones would come out. People would be people want to get pictures with it. Completely different. There's a friend of mine in Dubai who had a Trans Am, which he'd basically done into a kit replica, a Knight Rider replica. Again, that guy was like, of no stature whatsoever, but drive that car and suddenly he's a superstar, So that's all of a sudden, I think it's all about, like here in London, if you drive a supercar around in London, you'll get hand gestures, but they're not the hand gestures that you might appreciate.
They're telling you're number one.
Yes, basically. Number one, or you to have RSI, repetitive strain injury, in your wrist. That sort of thing.
Exactly. But the irony, of course, of driving a supercar in places like London is you can't park them in an undercover car park because they can't get. they weren't built to take supercars. You know, at times people get them stuck halfway.
They're not built to take any car.
You know, get out, have to push them through and stuff. It's
London wasn't built for supercars. I mean, you know, as you might be familiar, we have width restrictions on some roads. In fact, there's a couple near me. There's width restrictions. I hate these things, width restrictions, because the width restrictions are about 1.9, maximum 2 meters wide, or they could be 1.8 to 2 meters wide, depending, right? I mean, it's a real butter clenching moment, no matter what car you're in, when you're trying to get through these things. And they build them to be nasty. Like the curbs are coming right up. They're wheel destroyers. They're very deliberate. Like councils hate your car, basically. That's what they're telling you. And a supercar, you take an Aventador, that's over 2 meters wide.
Yep.
All of a sudden, that's not getting through that gap. If you even come down that road, that's it. You're screwed. You know, it's as simple as that. But yeah, London. The only advantage of a supercar is that when you go into an underground car park, you can normally drive the thing under the barrier.
Well, go back to the Morgan. I like that they used to have a car company in Hong Kong called Bufatti, which basically looked like Morgans.
Right.
And I like the fact that you can custom make your Morgan. Bufatti was the same thing, but Bufatti would measure you.
Yeah.
So when they built your car, I don't even know if Bufatti's around anymore, but Bufatti would measure you and make sure that you literally the only one that's ever going to drive your car. So if you ordered a Bufatti, that was it. I know Morgan kind of does the same thing, but the 3-wheel Morgan, and I don't know if it's street legal here in the States, but I've seen a couple, but I always love the Morgans because they bring you back to that 19, 20, 30 era, kind of when a car was a car. It's just, the engine notes are beautiful. The car is beautiful. So, and to me, that's to me also a supercar. It's a supercar in a different context of supercar. Today, supercar is like, 10,000 horsepower, 0 to 60 in a second. No, it's a supercar because of what it is.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that goes back to the art of it.
I like cars that bring joy, not just to the person that owns them and drives them, but to the people that perceive
everybody.
Them. You know, so that to me is the ultimate win. That's the win-win scenario. Correct. So, for example, I have this, as I mentioned before, the BMW E30. Now, I owned one in the 90s. In the 90s, I'd be that Asian kid in the black leather jacket, with the because the only thing I did was stick an amplifier in it. So I had, big bungra coming out of it. And I probably was not, well liked when I was driving that around. There's such a stereotype, brown kid in the BMW 3 Series. It's, fast forward 25 years to now. Now, when I drive that thing, I get thumbs ups. I get smart people talking to me at traffic lights, and somebody's like, "Oh man, I remember that car." Oh, we had suddenly, like, I'm driving this around. I'm like, I'm not just enjoying this, but there's a lot of other people that are also enjoying the fact that I'm driving it around, and that just times factor of X whatever makes you feel even better about yourself and your car. I think that's just awesome. To me, that is a supercar.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Well, and that's what I'm saying.
Let me say something. You've been an absolutely super guest today.
Yes, and, you got to come back.
And yeah, absolutely. It's time's ticking off for everybody today because we've got another one lined up. I think another show we have to do today. Super busy, but thank you so much for being on.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for
having me. Very much hope that this is not the last time you join us.
Not at all.
Yeah. So. What happens now is that we say goodbye to everybody, but stay on for a little while because we want to take some details from you so we can make sure that everybody gets all the links and everything. Will all be down here for the show. And thank you, Stephen, for your time today. Thank you, Shahzad. And until we meet
our
again,
BCG, hopefully BCG will be back. We're gonna try to. We're gonna whatchamacallit, the brown car guy. We're gonna try to make sure we're gonna apply him with bribes and whatever it takes. Morgan, but we'll be back, guys. Thanks you so much,
guys. Thank you so much.
Have a good holiday, everybody. Cheers.
Yeah. Bye bye.